fifth graders. Today we are going to do the 13th lesson of the 13 Colonies unit, and it is on the Quaker Way of Life. So we're going to learn about the Quakers who were in Pennsylvania, and let's go ahead and get started. So first we're going to do a little bit of reading about the Quakers in general and the diversity in the Middle Colonies. And then we're going to go through some different topics in Quaker life. So the diverse Middle Colonies. The Middle Colonies were the most diverse region of colonial America. That means they had the most differences. The English, Swedes, Germans, Scots, the Dutch, the French, Native American tribes, and African slaves lived near and among each other. Unlike strictly Puritan New England, a variety of religions was practiced in the Middle Colonies. For example, there were Mennonites, Lutherans, Dutch Calvinists, Presbyterians, and Quakers. The largest group were the Quakers. So this area of the Middle Colonies, New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and Delaware, had the most diversity of people and religions of all of the 13 colonies. The Quakers were mostly in Pennsylvania. Quakers in England. The Quaker faith, or the Religious Society of Friends, that's what they were also called, was founded in England by George Fox. Quakers were Christians who disagreed with the practices of the Church of England. They felt that religion was personal and that each individual had the right to a direct relationship with God. They rejected elaborate religious ceremonies, so very detailed and fancy religious ceremonies, and an official clergy or head of the church. In addition, they believed that all people, regardless of race, gender, or class, were equal. They refused to bow down to nobility, so they didn't want to have a king, or use honorific titles like your lordship. So those were titles that were commonly used during that time, and they didn't like those titles. They liked everybody to be treated equal. In addition, they were pacifists, which means they were against violence and war. They even refused to pay taxes if the money would go toward the military. The Quakers were severely persecuted in England. Many Quakers spent time in jail because of their beliefs. So they were kind of the first protesters or people who stood up for something that they really believed strongly in. And then we've got William Penn. This is a cartoon type painting of William Penn that's on the Quaker Oats symbol. So if you've ever seen a Quaker Oats container, that is supposed to be William Penn, or a variation of him, because that's what he was used in early advertising. So Pennsylvania Colony was founded in 1682. William Penn was a wealthy English nobleman and a Quaker. King Charles II owed Penn's father a debt. To repay the debt, he gifted or gave William Penn a large tract of land in the New World that covered modern-day Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. The royal colony was named Pennsylvania Colony, and we talked about why that was, because it was William Penn and plus the word Sylvania, which means woodlands. And William Penn was its governor. As a Quaker, Penn had experienced persecution and dreamed of setting up a colony that could be a refuge for Quakers. So he had experienced in England being treated poorly and negatively for his religious beliefs, and that's why he wanted to create a place where people could feel like they could do what they wanted to do and practice their own religion. He wanted to offer religious freedom and more equality than there was in England. Under Penn's leadership, Pennsylvania Colony thrived, so it did really well. There was religious freedom for Quakers and for those of other faiths. Women saw far greater freedom there than in other colonies. They still didn't have all the freedoms that men had, but they had way more. In addition, Penn was able to negotiate peace with the nearby Native American tribes. Again, it's not that the Native American people had all the rights of everybody else, but there was a more peaceful relationship during the time that William Penn was alive. Okay, so now we're going to go through each kind of subtopic of Quaker life, and the first one's education. And you can see this image of some people, kids and an adult in a schoolroom, and you can kind of see like how they're boys and girls in there. So that was an interesting thing about the Quakers. So the goal for Quaker education was to guard children from the evil influences of the world. So they wanted to keep children kind of morally good. And they valued simplicity and plainness. So this was like in everything. So kind of like the Puritans did in this way, where like they didn't like these big fancy churches. They didn't wear like really crazy fancy clothes. They were very plain. William Penn suggested that schools teach frugality, which means like how to be frugal, like how to use what you have and fix things that are broken and save your money. And he also suggested like teaching practical skills to children in school so that they learn how to live life. Boys and girls were both educated and they were taught how to read. So there was a high rate of literacy among the Quakers. But at the same time, you know, they said, oh, we believe in equal rights for all and everybody should be educated, but not African Americans. They didn't get to be educated, neither did Native Americans, until the late 1700s. So it took a long time for them to extend the equality beliefs to people of color. Students learned through primers, so those same like textbooks that we've talked about before with the Pilgrims and the Puritans, and grammar books, and they also learned through religious stories. So those were all things that were used in education. Religious stories was a really big one. Okay, so next we're going to talk about religion, and you can see in this photo you have several Quaker men. There's a little dog in there too, but they are looking at some books, and perhaps they're at church, perhaps they are reading the Bible, but they're all together. What it doesn't show is that women were allowed to go to church and are actually allowed to speak at church, which was a big deal. So let's learn more about religion. Okay, so in the reading we found out that George Fox was the founder, and he made the Religious Society of Friends, and that became the Quaker religion. And all of the people in the Quaker religion were called friends. That's what they were referred to. And this was all in the 1600s. And then who it appealed to was anybody who was a religious dissenter from the Church of England. And remember, religious dissenter means that they didn't want to practice Church of England religion anymore. So they wanted to do something else. And so just what William Penn wanted to create this place for religious dissenters. They believed that each person had a direct personal relationship with God. So this meant that they didn't think that God had the same thing to say to all people, that each person had kind of a separate religion or way that they practiced religion with God. There was equity for men and women in a lot of ways, not in all ways, but in a lot of ways. They didn't believe in violence or war that was against their religious principles. They lived by a strict moral code, and that means that they had a very strict sense of what was right and wrong, and that was taught through their religion too. They wore conservative clothing, so nothing like too like fancy or like provocative. Like they were very covered up people, like even their heads, like hats and long sleeves and long skirts. They had no gambling, so that wasn't allowed at all. No drinking, so obviously they drank water and stuff like that, but they couldn't drink alcohol. The adults couldn't drink alcohol. They had no telling of lies of any kind, like no joke lie telling, no little white lie, nothing, always the truth. And they even had a rule about no stage plays, like that was something that was not approved of. So like any kind of play with actors, they did not do that. And this Pennsylvania was created as this haven for religious dissenters to practice any religion they wanted, and there was no persecution. So that was the big founding religious belief. Something that's really interesting is Quakers are still practicing today. There are Quakers in Pennsylvania. They do not look like the Quakers that you're seeing in these pictures. They look like just anybody you would see today. You wouldn't really even be able to pick out the fact that they were a Quaker. But it's still a modern religion that's practiced today. Okay, so then the social class system, and this is where I think the Quakers are the most interesting because they have the strong belief system of equality, but a lot of the racism and sexism that we've seen in this part of history, it's still like pretty, it's there with the Quakers too. And they didn't really stand against it until later. This is an important picture because this is a picture of an African-American slave, and it says at the bottom, am I not a man or a brother? And this was used in the 1700s. It was originally a medallion, so it was like a medal, but was worn, and it was like a anti-slavery statement. So that's just the picture of it, but it was printed on a lot of things too, like coins, little plates and boxes and things like that. So they wanted equality for everyone, regardless of gender, class, or race. That was their big belief system, even though it wasn't really 100% practiced. Because women couldn't vote or own property, so they could speak out at church, which was a big deal. No other colonists were really able to do that if they were women, but they still didn't have the right to vote. They still couldn't own property. William Penn was a slave owner, so it's really hard for me to be like, yay, Quakers, like they were so progressive because he owned slaves. I mean, it's really great that these ideas were starting, but they still had a long way to go. And today we are still having a long way to go with racial justice and equity. Wealthy white landowners, indentured servants, and slaves were all part of the social class system then. So it's kind of the same deal as everything else that was going on in the colonies. If you were a white man who was wealthy, you owned land, you did really well, you had a lot of privileges. And there was the other classes, the indentured servants, who had more rights than the slaves, but were still didn't have all the freedoms, and then the slaves who had basically nothing and were treated horribly. Slavery was finally outlawed with the Quakers in the 1700s, and the leaders, the Quaker leaders, were really the ones who started speaking out about slavery, against it. They were called abolitionists. And then the Quaker women were the ones who led the women's right to vote when all of that started happening. So the Quakers did really come through with some being some leaders in some social justice and racial justice matters. Okay, so let's learn more about Quaker women. And this is a portrait of a Quaker woman. You could kind of see in this portrait how I'm talking about, like how their clothes were kind of plain and they were like really conservative, like very covered, like all the way up to her neck. She has a hat on, sleeves go all the way down. The dress is probably really long. So they were like very covered up. And most portraits at the time, the women aren't like smiling or men. That's not usually what they did. They usually had like a serious face. But you could see how like, she's still very proper and sitting very straight up. And so there's definitely not like, it's not like how women are in modern day, right? Not as many freedoms. So women were educated and they were allowed to speak in religious meetings like we talked about. But business meetings, so religious meetings, women spoke. Business meetings, not so much. Like those were really dominated by men. And women didn't really get in there and speak in business meetings. They weren't able to vote or own property like we talked about before. Mary Dyer was one social activist who was a Quaker, and she challenged anti-Quaker laws in Massachusetts Bay Colony in 1659. She was not popular there. Everyone thought she was very evil to coming into Massachusetts Bay and challenging the laws that they had and kind of saying like the Quaker way is the way to live, where there's choice and freedoms in your religion. So she was banished from there, and then she tried to return, and in 1660 she was hanged for her Quaker religion. So we'll go on and talk about government, and here's a photograph or a painting of an assembly of Quakers in their government, and they had the kind of government that was like the stepping stones to our Declaration of Independence and Constitution. So it was like the stepping stones towards democracy. But it was still borrowed a lot from English government. So we know that Pennsylvania was founded by William Penn in 1681. And the land was given to Penn by the King of England. So that kind of explains why a lot of the English government was still kind of borrowed from England. And we know Penn experienced this religious persecution in England, and that's why he wanted to form this kind of government that was separate from religion. So the first constitution that they made in Pennsylvania had 2 house parliaments, and it had an upper and lower house. So it was structured very similarly to England, but it like I said before, it was kind of like the first colonies to move towards a democratic way of governing. They had no taxes that supported church or laws that colonists must worship in a certain way. So this was really different than other colonies because we saw in other colonies that church and state, or church and like the colony's government, were very, very combined. They were like the same almost. And here with the Quakers, they said, nope, anything that we're dealing with the government and money and taxes, that's just the government, and then anything that is related to religion or church is just the church. And that makes a lot of sense because there were people practicing all different types of religion. Pennsylvania maintained good relations with the Native American people during Penn's lifetime. So after this, I'm going to have you guys listen to a story that I'm going to read about Native American people because I think one of the things that's hard when we look at history, is a lot of books are kind of like, oh, there was the first Thanksgiving and everybody got along, and then we don't really ever look at like how the Native Americans were treated poorly again, and then how things seemed like we got better, and then it happened again. So it's been a long history of Native Americans being killed, being removed from their land, being persecuted for what they are believing and the culture that they have, and not assimilating to the white people or becoming just like the white people. So we're going to read that. So it's really important to say that the Quakers had a good relationship with Native Americans, but only during Penn's lifetime. Okay, so questions on Schoology. So I want you to identify the most interesting fact you learned about Quaker life. Like, what did you think was really interesting, and why did you think that was so interesting? And then also, what question do you have about Quaker life? There's probably other questions. Like, one question I can think of is, I wonder how close Quaker people are today to how Quakers practice their lives and their government and their religions in the 16 and 1700s. So that would be interesting to me to compare and contrast. So I want you to try to think of one question that you have, okay? And then next I would like you to listen to the story about Native Americans. It's a very, very beautiful book called The People Shall Continue. It's a very beautiful book. I was super excited to find this book. So I want you to listen to this story next, which I'm going to do in a separate video so that I can really zoom in on the beautiful illustrations in this book too. Okay, so thank you very much for watching my lesson, and I'm excited to play the game tomorrow with you guys. One thing to note is that I'm going to have 2 live sessions at 1:30 and 2:30 on Friday for the multiple choice game about all the colonies, but I'm also going to do one on Monday, because if anybody is needing to go and participate in the statewide walkout for Black Lives Matters, I really want you to be able to do that. But I also want to respect the fact that some parents have to work and they need their kids to have something to do. So I'm going to do it both ways. So if you are doing the walkout tomorrow, don't worry. You're not going to miss a lesson. You can just do the game on Monday instead. Okay? I will see you guys tomorrow or Monday. Thank you.